Welcome to First Person, where we discuss the issues that impact California's public education with the individuals who shape those issues. Today, we're talking with Ryan Smith, the Executive Director of Education Trust West, also one of my friends and mentors. Today, we'll be discussing, amongst other things, CELA, transparency, and the new continuous improvement accountability system. I'm Wes Smith. Welcome to First Person. Well, Ryan, thanks for being here. Sincerely mean it when I say that I consider you a friend and a mentor. What you've taught me about fighting for the underserved, underprivileged, underrepresented in the last 3 years is, I just can't thank you enough. Anyway, a lot of our members may not know what Ed Trust West is, or Education Trust West. So maybe we could start with just telling our folks what it is you do, what you study, what you try to accomplish.
Yes, and first of all, thanks for having me. I like to think of us as brothers from another mother. I often hear about the Smith brothers, and it's been a pleasure partnering with you and ACSA over the last couple of years. So I have the real honor of leading Education Trust West. We are a California-based research, policy, and advocacy organization really dedicated to closing achievement opportunity gaps and racial justice. Bayard Rustin, who is somebody, he was the architect of the March on Washington, he said, every community needs a group of angelic troublemakers. So I have the privilege of working with educators and lawyers and researchers and policy analysts who literally gave up lucrative careers to really fight in order to close achievement opportunity gaps in our generation. So it's exciting work, and if there's ever been a time to really be an angelic troublemaker, I think now is the time.
Absolutely, angelic troublemaker.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes.
I love that. And I think it's important for our members to know that you're doing this research, that your work is dedicated to serving those that are most critically underserved. And as such, they can reach out to you. Our members and districts can get a hold of you, especially now as we're trying to engage our stakeholders.
Yep.
As we're trying to measure our success in narrowing and eliminating those persistent achievement, access, and opportunity gaps, that they can call you.
Absolutely, and I should say that we really believe in partnerships. So we shine a light on data. We believe data is a great, powerful tool in order to engage people, to inform folks, but also as a way to encourage partnerships. I'll give an example. We have an amazing practice team that went around the state to look at evidence-based practices in supporting English learners, particularly connected to science. So we highlighted the districts who are making a difference across California and put in a report that we released recently called Unlocking Learning. We believe we should be shining the bright spots of where we're actually supporting English learners and students with disabilities and students of color across the state. And we're happy to partner with districts to unlock that, because as we've talked about, your members, folks who lead school systems, they are equity champions. Many of them came into the profession with a sense of, I want to do everything possible for low-income students and students of color. So this isn't about advocates versus educators. This is really about how do we find that table that we can work together with, and we're really committed to setting that table here in California.
No, I love that, and I couldn't agree more. When I hear people say, oh, well, we're student right advocates, I say, well, so are we.
Yeah.
We're the teachers, administrators, and leaders, and we are too. And as advocates, we all ought to get together and figure out how we can best advocate, most effectively advocate for those students that need us now, I believe, more than they've ever needed us.
Absolutely.
Speaking of partnerships, you have been instrumental in not only starting, but really keeping going CELA, the California Equity Leadership Alliance. Tell us what that is, who's involved, and what's CELA trying to do?
Yeah, so it was about maybe, I want to say 2 years ago now, that ACSA, along with the CSBA, CASBO, the California PTA, CALSA, and CASA, and CECESA as well, came together and said, what can we do to be action-oriented around equity? A lot of the conversation around equity had seemed to be very political, or it's been very connected to policy. But we were saying in practice, how can we be action oriented? How can we engage our membership on exciting projects connected to equity? So we've been working together for 2 years to do a number of things. I know we've done a number of town halls at many of our conferences that talk about ways that we can address issues for low-income students and students of color. I can remember one at the CASA conference, which I thought was really fantastic, where all of us talked about what can we do to support undocumented students and their families. We know if there was ever a time, if there was ever a civil rights issue, the issue of really understanding immigrant families and making sure that no matter where a child comes from, they feel safe in our classrooms is one that we all can champion. So out of that town hall, we started to do work on, well, we should be educating more of our school leaders on those issues. And it's been exciting to do the work with you and the other organizations in CELA.
And I think people watching can tell why you fire me up so much. I mean, it doesn't take much anyway, but I hear you talk about these issues, and it's inspiring. And you know, ACSA, as you know, I argue that we are the strongest advocates for students in California, and I encourage other people to make that same argument. Because if we're all debating who's the strongest advocate for kids, students are gonna succeed, right?
Absolutely.
Then you know, right after the election, the day after the election, by noon, ACSA had on its website resources for undocumented students and families.
Absolutely.
Legal documents, documents from PIOs that would help us communicate with our parents, with our students, with our staff in English and in Spanish. So this has been really important to us. And so as we've worked with CELA and with you, it has been nothing short of inspiring to see the work that's been accomplished and produced. And so just recently, the Undocumented Student Equity Toolkit has been launched.
Yes.
Yeah, why don't you tell people about that? Because there's a link on your website, there's a link on our ACSA.org website. Great work. Tell us a bit about that Equity Toolkit.
Well, this is where I'm proud of ACSA, and I'm proud of California leadership, where the political landscape, particularly for undocumented students and families, has been challenging. I think particularly California organizations have said, what can we do to really support and meet the needs of our families, particularly undocumented students and families. So just as you mentioned, ACSA started to act. And then we saw groups like CSBA and our organization starting to put out resources as well. And we said, why don't we create a repository for educators and policymakers and students and families that's on the website, that's accessible, so that they know the documents that are out there. They know the work that ACSA is doing. They know the work that school board members are doing. They know the organizations in many communities that they can go to in order to gain more information. So we recently launched our toolkit for educators to understand how to support undocumented students and families. And it's, you know, this being Immigrant Heritage Month, there's never been a better time for it. And we're excited. We think it's going to be an excellent tool that we'll continue to refresh. And we're really happy to partner with ACSA and many of the school communities who've really prioritized this issue.
Give us your URL so our members watching this, if they want to reach out, because they can get the toolkit on our website also. But when I look at your website, I see links to Black Minds Matter and other great research opportunities that they can avail themselves of. Great information. So give that to us.
Yeah, and so it's www.edtrustwest.org. So www.edtrustwest.org. And as you mentioned, we do research, but it's all California based. It's all steeped in what's happening in our classrooms today. We really think of ourselves as being a place where educators and school leaders and school administrators can really come to say, okay, I see the promising practices that are happening. How can we work with that? Or, hey, I know who to reach out to now, because they're really focused on the unique needs of African American students, if you're looking at our Black Minds Matter report. Or we're going to launch a report around the state of Latino students soon.
Right.
That's going to be amazing, because I think our state hinges on supporting that demographic given the numbers. So,
And when's that due out?
yeah, so that's due out in the fall, and we're calling it the Majority Report. And we know that obviously Latino students are the majority of our student demographic. But not only that, we know that in that population are our future scientists, our future governor, is the future head of ACSA. And I think we have to think about how do we prepare that demographic along with all of our students of color and low-income students to thrive. So we're excited about it. It's going to unearth where we see districts really making a difference for Latino students, and that will come out in the fall.
Yeah, that's exciting. Good chance for us to take a bit of a break. When we come back with Ryan Smith, we'll talk about some of the areas where as friends we might disagree a little bit, which should be enlightening. Anyway, we'll see you in just a minute.
California has 6.2 million public school students. Here at the Association of California School Administrators, we care about every single one. We're honored to bring you the stories of 21 students who fought tirelessly to get to where they are today. They will inspire you, and they will move you. But most of all, they'll remind you what is best about California's public schools.
Welcome back to First Person. Again, we're meeting with Ryan Smith, the Executive Director of F1rst. We just talked about CELA and some of the great work and resources there. I want to let you know that is really social media friendly. So look at Twitter, Facebook, all of your social media accounts through ACSA, through F1rst. Some great information there. Again, Ryan, we were talking about being friends, and one of the great things about friends is you can disagree about some things, and as you disagree, you learn more. At least that's the way I feel. Heck, my wife and I practice that almost nightly, right? We disagree a little bit and then learn from one another. And while, all kidding aside, I know that you and I and our associations, we share the same goal.
Absolutely.
Which is to make sure that students thrive. And in particular, that equity is served, that those that have been underserved, underprivileged, underrepresented historically in this country, that they have their needs met and exceeded, that they achieve, that those gaps not only are narrowed, but they're eliminated. And that's our goal.
Absolutely.
And so where we disagree is sometimes just on how do we get there. Right? And one of those areas right now that we're working through is on transparency. AB 1321, Dr. Weber's bill, is an example. And without getting into the weeds on that bill, we know that you're advocating for transparency. We support transparency. We support accountability. We're given these resources, we're given these students, we have to be accountable for how we spend these resources to serve them. But there are concerns you have. So share some of those with us, with our members, so that we can learn from those concerns and create a better system.
Yeah. First, I'll just a point on where we agree. So, I believe in our movement towards continuous improvement. I actually believe achievement opportunity gaps are not going to be solved in the policy realm. They're really going to be solved by the hard work of educators on the ground who are working day in and day out. So this move towards perfecting practice makes sense. And giving educators the tools necessary in order to thrive absolutely is something that we 100% wholeheartedly agree with. I think what we would like to see as we think about our accountability system is that all stakeholders have an understanding of what's happening, that all the information makes sense. We know that our school communities thrive when parents and students, community members, educators, school leaders are working together to solve issues. And right now we have built, and I think are building, an amazing accountability system that's supporting continuous improvement and supporting educators to do that. I think where we've fallen short, two places. One, we need to make sure equity is our North Star. Sometimes we talk about equity as if it's a periphery issue, but with 1 out of 5 of our students being English learners, 3 out of 5 of our students being Latino or African American, it's important that we're talking about what we're going to do to move the needle. Equity cannot just be disaggregating data, because we know the gaps exist.
Right.
Equity has to be, what are we planning on doing about it? Equity has to be,
well, and how have we done?
Absolutely.
Right.
And how have we done?
So what
right?
are we going to do, and how are we doing?
And where are we making a difference?
Yeah.
And if I need to go to page 37 on a website to figure out how my student looks, or is doing, or how Latino students are doing, that's not an equity, and that's not even the spirit of California. So I think we need to make the implicit explicit in our accountability system, meaning we need to know how students are doing up front. The second thing—
Now, you influence that. Let's stop there
Yeah.
for a second, because I think, and let's come back to fiscal
Sure.
transparency, because I think that's one of the other
Sure.
issues, right? You and I have had this conversation for a couple of years
Yeah.
about this summary number, this summary judgment, and does it really tell our folks the true story, right? And so as we created this new system, we wanted to look at a discrete set of multiple measures that gave a clearer picture. What
Absolutely.
I would say is a truer picture of how our students are doing.
Absolutely.
But you reminded me that if we have too many things we look at, that we can hide behind that plethora of data and not address the issues,
Yes.
the realities, right? And so one of the things we fought for, and really this was because of our conversations, was that this accountability system put equity on the front page. That when it was first being discussed with the State Board of Education, you'll remember, it was several pages in that we talked about equity. I stood up at the State Board meeting and said, we cannot do that. We've got to put equity
Right.
on page one.
Absolutely.
Let's put it as item number one.
Absolutely.
Right? Let's lead with equity. So we've made some improvements, and you influence that. But there's still things we need to do. We need to
Absolutely.
make that information accessible for all of our constituents.
And we need to make sure that we have goals that show our public that we believe we can narrow the gap and close the gap. And if our goals aren't explicit, then it's a challenge for, you can imagine, a parent to understand, well, what is it that we're aiming for? What is it that I should be looking out for? So I worked in LAUSD schools for about 6 years doing parent engagement work in communities like South Los Angeles, Boyle Heights in East LA, and Watts. And what I learned knocking on those doors and getting parents engaged is that they care so much about ensuring that their children succeed. They have that one shot, and they want the information so that they can help their students as much as possible, help their schools and communities as much as possible. So our job at the state level is to make sure we do that in an easy way. We can't tell parents to go and ask for public records requests to see how money is being spent. We can't tell parents to figure out websites to figure out if their school district is doing what's in the best interest of students. Let's figure out how we partner in local communities to make that information as transparent as possible. And I believe we can do that. As you mentioned, this is still a work in progress. So you and I are coming at this thinking about how we serve our constituencies, and I think we'll meet at the right place, but we're both pushing in ways that I think will only improve the system moving forward.
Yeah, and you've shared that it's really important for our members, for our leaders, to tell their stories with their local stakeholders. That they're not just depending on them to go to a website and get the information, that they're sharing those successes. One of the concerns I have with the analyses you're seeing right now with the new accountability and continuous improvement system is that we're looking at test scores. I think it's way too soon to look at test scores, but what about the other indicators that we've had for some time? We have multiple years of data. Are we telling the story about our graduation rates? And are we breaking down that data so we're looking at the graduation rates of student populations in particular? Are we looking at suspension and expulsion data and making sure that we're not disproportionately punishing some of our students?
Absolutely.
As opposed to engaging them? Are we looking at engagement? We could be looking at that. So telling our stories is important. I worry that we're going to leap to, but how are we doing on a test? Which I will, for my entire career, argue that that doesn't tell you the whole story. It tells you a story, but the whole story is told by more of that data. But to your point, we could do a better job of sharing that in meaningful, accessible ways with our community members.
Absolutely agree, and in a couple ways. One, we are seeing graduation rates go up in California. That's something to be applauded. We are seeing some gaps narrowed in graduation. That's something we should applaud. The fact that there's so many districts who focused on suspensions and expulsions, particularly actually dismantling what some call the school to prison pipeline by implementing things like positive behavior intervention supports and restorative practices. Like, those are things we need to applaud. But we also need to make sure that as we're in this multiple measure era, and I think it's important that we do have a more holistic view of our students, that we're doing everything necessary to make sure that we're closing equity gaps. And to your point, testing isn't everything, and I'll be the first one to say that. I will say though, before we did testing, before we actually looked at assessments, there was a time where we judged or we thought about schools just on averages. Well, how is the average
Absolutely.
doing? We did not think about, well, a school can look good, but African American students aren't doing that well. Latino students aren't doing that well. Students with disabilities are pushed to the side. We never want to go back to those dark ages in this state. So we have to know how our students are learning, and we have to create goals to ensure that that matters, because when we don't know that, unfortunately, those students are not always given, particularly at least what I've seen in my experience, priority.
Yeah.
So as we've implemented local control funding formula, which is all about equity, we need to make sure that that is getting the results necessary for these students to graduate and have an option of college or a rewarding career.
No, and the academics are a huge part of it, and assessments are one way that we can look at a set of common standards,
Yes.
right? So long as they're the appropriate standards and they're well articulated, and that the assessment matches those, it's a good indicator for that.
Yes.
And then there are other things
Yes.
that we look at
Absolutely.
as well. I share this all the time. When I was in high school, our high school was one of the top remaining five schools that was going to be then visited by President Reagan. And it was a good school. My dad taught there for 42 years. I'm convinced the reason they almost came to our school is because we had a great football team. So I think, back in the
right.
day,
That's
your
right.
school was evaluated based on how you did on Friday night under the lights in many instances. We didn't disaggregate data.
That's
We
right.
didn't look at how our most underserved and
right.
underrepresented were doing. And we didn't have measurements to do that.
Right.
Right? So I applaud where we are with that. Just contend that there are lots of data points, not too many, because then we get lost in it. But there are more than one
Yes,
that we have to look
I
at.
absolutely
like
agree.
engagement, how safe are kids feeling at school? How engaged are they in their classroom? And we haven't gotten close enough on that indicator right now.
Yep.
But let's get to fiscal transparency, because I know this is one right now that in the state, given what's going on, it's an important topic, and it's fairly politically heated right now.
Well, I will say this. I think we've moved to local control funding formulas. We all know, and I think that was the right move. And applaud the governor and the administration, because if it's done anything, it's made sure that we are prioritizing those districts that have high concentrations of low-income students and English learners and foster youth and homeless youth. Like, that's exciting. We did that so that these students can have the opportunity to thrive. And we're 4 years in now. And I was there 4 years ago when I saw parents and students join hands with educators to march and say, this matters. Equity matters. We want to see this pass. We know that many of those folks went to the polls to pass Proposition 30 and to come back to renew Proposition 30. So we have given people hope about what this can do to benefit students. Unfortunately, I will say, at least what we've seen in our research, in our conversations with communities, they have not had a sense in many places of what districts have done with LCFF, how the money that's being generated by low-income students and students of color are being spent in their interest. And I want LCFF to be around for the next 20 years. I believe a great way to ensure that is to provide some more clarity about the good work that school leaders and school administrators are doing with LCFF by showing how they're spending the money to benefit students. And I know your members, I know, because we've done the research, and I know people all over the state don't want to hide how we're spending this money.
Right.
This is the public good. These are our students. But right now, it's nearly impossible to figure out where this money is going. And we don't want to make it seem as if it's not being spent on these students. So I asked the folks who've really championed this policy, as we had, when it was passed, to figure out a way we can provide more clarity, particularly on how the dollars are spent. I think it's a grand compromise as we've provided some space and opportunity to think differently about practice and how we're supporting students. Expenditure information would help with that compromise.
I think that's absolutely an area where we agree. I'm concerned always that we don't go back to a compliance-driven system. It didn't work then. It won't ever work. That being said, we have to be able to give our communities the information they need to see how their students are doing and to be accountable for those resources. And so where is that sweet spot?
Yeah.
Right? Where we're not having the tail wag the dog. It used to be about filling out forms and all the rules for the forms and checking the boxes and all that, as opposed to doing the work and getting the outcomes.
Absolutely.
And as we said a minute ago, we can't just say we're for outcomes and not share those outcomes.
Right.
We've got to tell that story. We've got to show our communities that, hey, the resources are being used and here is the benefit.
Right.
Here are the things that we're doing better.
Yep. And I'll just say,
We're going to take a quick break. Let's come back and share with the members maybe just some best practices.
Sure.
As you're out there fighting this fight for your students, communicating with your parents, the folks that we're meeting with, that we're studying, are saying this. And here's one way that you could help be even more successful in your school districts, because that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Yep.
We'll be right back with Ryan Smith.
The idea of advocacy has to go beyond just we go and talk, but we also need to be able to provide support when necessary. And I think that's what the PAC funds do, is they allow us to be selective and to support legislators and pieces of legislation to really improve what we do in the state of California for students.
I think unless we contribute something, then our voices are soft. And there's other associations that have huge PACs because they can collect by the amount of members that they have. Remember that the private sector has big PACs and big lobbyists, and we need to do everything we can to empower our lobbyists to fight for us and to fight for students in California.
I think it's so important that I have already made a donation. It's very easy to do, and it's available online.
So get your wallet out and get a contribution to PAC.
Welcome back to First Person. So when we ended, we were talking about some things that our school districts and our leaders could do to demonstrate that the resources are being used appropriately to benefit the students who generate those resources. I believe that in most cases out there, that's what's happening, that the work's being done, but maybe we're not sharing that work. So maybe you could share with our members so they could benefit in their communities by what you're hearing from the stakeholders.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things that I think are really promising practices in what we've seen, particularly in the age of LCFF. If you look at Long Beach Unified, they've invested some of their dollars in order to increase the number of AP classes, particularly for low-income students and students of color. If we go to San Francisco Unified, they have drastically changed the way that they're looking at A through G classes for all. And not only that, in a recent audit done by the state, they are one of the best districts up and down the state in providing A through G classes and getting students to and through on A through G. And I think that's really exciting, particularly for low-income students and students of color. We see some similar efforts with San Diego Unified too. We also, I'm really excited about some of the promising practices we're seeing around engagement, since you brought that up. We are seeing districts actually going to meet parents where they're at, so it's not just, hey, come to our district space for a sit down and get information, but having a dialogue and discussion about how can we develop the best plan possible. And there's many districts who are starting to implement and engage in those really exciting ways. And they're just thinking about how they share information differently and how they bring on people who can really connect to communities. Lastly, what we're seeing, which I think is really good, is that even in the age of LCFF, we're beginning to see some districts think differently about transparency. Some districts do disaggregate the dollars by supplemental and concentration and provide that to districts and, provide that to the public, and I think that's great as well. So we're seeing some exciting things. I think this is the new age of partnership. You and I being here is an example of that. And I'm excited because both you and I and others really are looking at equity as California's North Star. And I hope we'll continue to have discussions like this to make sure that all students thrive, no matter where they're from.
No, thank you. I can't thank Ryan Smith enough for coming and sharing some of those insights with us. I would just encourage all of you, our members, that if you need advocates, if you need resources, you need support, call F1rst West. Get them in the district. If it's an issue of engagement, have them help you. Negotiations, I'd be calling you right away to help me with that in my district, to talk about that North Star and what works and what doesn't work. And while we disagree, we all agree that our students matter, equity matters. We have a moral obligation in this state to narrow and ultimately eliminate those access, opportunity, achievement gaps. And the only way we're going to do that is do it together. And even when we disagree on small things, they're not small things, but the particulars like AB 1321, we agree in transparency, we agree with accountability, and again, we agree that our students matter most. So Ryan, thank you, and thank all of you for tuning in. We'll see you next time.